So with Dimensional Barrier essentially solidifying itself as a staple this format, a lot of players are starting to test with other back row removal like Night Beam, Cosmic Cyclone, and Twin Twister pretty much being the go-tos. But at this point, does it really matter which back row disruption you choose? What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now today I'm bringing you a video discussing the effectiveness and really the problem with back row removal that the game is currently facing. Now MCoF already did a video on this a few days ago. I was actually going to publish it around the same time, but then we started doing our collaboration and all that fun stuff, so I postponed it for today. So the biggest issue right now with back row removal is essentially one card, and that card is Dimensional Barrier. And the reason why Dimensional Barrier is the biggest problem with this card is because Dimensional Barrier is a chainable trap and basically chainable Vanity's Emptiness, so let's not try to sugarcoat it. And with the way the format is shaping up, it is proven that it is basically the best card this format, because if you get Dimensional Barrier flipped on you, 9 times out of 10 your turn is pretty much over and there's really nothing that you can do. So players have been trying to figure out and kind of solve this issue so that you really don't exactly completely get blown out by Vanity's Emptiness. But let me go ahead and present to you with a scenario. So your opponent has Dimensional Barrier set. Your opponent could even show you that they have Dimensional Barrier set and will tell you when they activate it. So here's the issue. If you have Twin Twister, you're going to take a -1 to get hit by Dimensional Barrier. If you have Cosmic Cyclone, you're going to pay 1,000 life points to get hit by Dimensional Barrier. And if you have Night Beam is pretty much the best card in this scenario because you're going to be able to snipe the Dimensional Barrier and then it's not going to be able to activate. But in this format that we're currently faced with, pretty much it's very uncommon for these types of decks to only be setting one back row. So now let me present you with another scenario. Let's say you have a Dimensional Barrier and a Solemn Strike that you're faced with. If you use Twin Twister, while you're not going to take a -1, you're still going to get hit by Dimensional Barrier. If you use Cosmic Cyclone and hit Dimensional Barrier, you're still going to get hit by Dimensional Barrier, and you're still going to have to deal with Solemn Strike. This means that obviously if you use Cosmic Cyclone to hit Solemn Strike, that's the better of the two options, but you're still going to get hit by fucking Dimensional Barrier. The best scenario, again, is Night Beam, where Night Beam can snipe the Dimensional Barrier, but in the instance of 2 back row, you're still going to have to deal with a Solemn Strike, which if you're playing any variant of Zodiac, pretty much can just end your turn. And on the flip side of the coin, if you play Night Beam hitting the Solemn Strike, you're still going to get hit by Dimensional Barrier. And the biggest flaw with Night Beam, we're going to talk about Night Beam a little bit more in depth here, is that the ruling with Night Beam is if you target Dimensional Barrier with Night Beam, let's assume you know which one is the Dimensional Barrier because your opponent showed it to you or something like that. If you target the Dimensional Barrier with Night Beam, if your opponent chains any other chainable card in response to Night Beam, they can then chain Dimensional Barrier in response to the card that they already chained as Chainlink 2, because Night Beam's text reads, the card that was targeted with Night Beam cannot be used in response to Night Beam's activation. So the way to get around it is if you chain one of your own cards and then chain Dimensional Barrier after that, Night Beam is basically ineffective. And in a format where, again, there's a lot of chainable disruption, things like Chalice, Book of Moon, all these other cards that are going around, Night Beam can pretty much be absolutely worthless in the attempts to stop Dimensional Barrier. But Night Beam is one of the best go-to options if, like, you would 100% of the time know where the Dimensional Barrier is out of all your opponent's set cards. I mean, if that was the case, we'd all be mating 3 Night Beam. And you've seen in a couple top decks that people are trying to do that because they want to take the gamble of being able to hit the Dimensional Barrier with Night Beam, because if they do, they're pretty much going to be able to still play the game compared to any other source of back row removal that's currently available. Now let's move on to Cosmic Cyclone, because Cosmic Cyclone is another card that a lot of players have been deviating to. The main reason for that is because Cosmic Cyclone can hit Zodiac Barrage, and not only hit it, but it also banishes it completely from the game. This interaction is very effective because not only are you going to stop Zodiac Barrage from triggering and special summoning a Zodiac monster on your opponent's field, but they're also not going to be able to get the destruction effect and be able to equip it to one of their Zodiac monsters that's currently on the field. And that's a very, very strong interaction, because if the Zodiac monsters get even one additional Xyz material, it can mean a world of difference in the available plays that they have at their disposal, and pretty much deviate their way of thinking in terms of what they want to do for that turn. So we saw that the OCG started migrating from Twin Twister to Cosmic Cyclone for this reason, because they really wanted to just focus solely on Barrage, because Barrage was the biggest problem, and they didn't really care about Dimensional Barrier and things like that, because hitting Barrage, let's be frank, Barrage is pretty much the most broken card in the Zodiac deck, because it allows you to dodge the biggest hindrance of Zodiac, which is having to commit to your normal summon. You know, Tenki and, you know, Ratpier, you have to use your normal summon in order to continue doing your plays. But Barrage, and I guess Terratop to an extent as well, but you have to summon it first. But Barrage, more specifically, just says, you know, you get to special summon a free Zodiac. And so that's what makes the deck just absolutely crazy. So people started, you know, flooding over towards Cosmic Cyclone, because people started figuring, well, why am I going to use Twin Twister on a single card and take a minus when Cosmic Cyclone can essentially do the same thing and actually does the job better, just at the cost of 1,000 life points instead of at the cost of a -1. But now this is where Twin Twister comes in, because Twin Twister is kind of like the ultimate middle ground here, because while you could take a -1 on hitting Barrage, and you know, if you hit a Dimensional Barrier, they're still gonna hit you with that Dimensional Barrier, the thing about Twin Twister is it deals with multiple threats at once, and in decks right now, especially in any deck that uses the Zodiac engine, you have so many extra cards at your disposal that really sometimes taking a minus isn't the worst thing, but being able to hit 2 copies of Solemn Strike and a Solemn Warning, something like Torrential Tribute, any other just crazy form of non-chainable back row that's still very popular in the format, is something that Twin Twister can do very well. And I also feel that Twin Twister has the greatest application in other matchups outside of Zodiac, solely for that purpose that it can just snipe out 2 cards immediately at the cost of something that you pretty much don't care about in the first place, because even if you ditch a rat, you can bring it back with Tiger Mortar in the instance of Zodiac. There's so many cards now that trigger in the graveyard that the cost of Twin Twister can pretty much be entirely mitigated altogether. But then this brings me to another point, and this is something that I kind of want to end the video on and leave in your guys' mind, and for you to let me know down in the comments what you think about this. What if we just play into Dimensional Barrier entirely and just completely skip back row altogether? Because here's my theory. You know that most of the time they're going to have Dimensional Barrier anyway, so rather than wasting your resources on a card that's going to get chained on you, why not have more defensive cards that you can have set up to prevent your opponent from killing you on their next turn? Things, you know, like Torrential Tribute, or really whatever kind of crazy defensive card that you really think would be most beneficial in this case, because think of the scenario here. If you're going to use the Twin Twister and get hit by Dimensional Barrier, you know, your turn's going to pretty much be over anyway. You're going to set whatever back row you can and really hope that you don't fucking die on your next turn. But in the instance of playing into Dimensional Barrier, say you're playing Zodiac and you start doing your typical combo and you get hit by Dimensional Barrier. Well, you now have a resource that would have been a Twin Twister, or even a Cosmic Cyclone, or a Night Beam, or whatever it would have been. That's one extra resource you now have at your disposal that you could set as back row, and another line of defense that your opponent now has to get through in order to kill you. So it's because ultimately Dimensional Barrier is going to end your turn one way or another. Sure, you might have to use your resources to play into Dimensional Barrier, but with the recovery that Zodiac has, does it really matter if you play into it? Because with cards like Tiger Mortar and Broad Bowl and all these other different things, Barrage as well, you can almost freely play into a Dimensional Barrier, but if you have enough defensive cards to last until your next turn, most of the time, the deck is able to recover and actually come back from being able to just be in a losing position because your defensive cards did the work during your opponent's turn, and then the Zodiac engine, being as strong as the engine is capable of just recovering and dealing an insane amount of damage. And if you have more defensive cards than your opponent, you might be able to theoretically outgrind them because they're not going to have the resources that you do, and ultimately it's just going to end up winning you the game. But again, this is just all theory and kind of something I've been thinking about because it just seems like a very big issue right now with Dimensional Barrier's existence into the game, what kind of spell and trap removal you want to do, and it's so frustrating how you can Twin Twister after Twin Twister into Dimensional Barrier after Dimensional Barrier and really not make a lot of progress. But this is just my attempts in trying to solve the format. But let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because just by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thank you guys so much again, and we'll see you next time.